Luke, it's so great to connect again today. I had two great students in my leadership class, both named Luke, both going into the career that you're in. So it gave me an excuse to get back in touch with you again. Of course, my students love chatting with you. I love reconnecting, and I'm grateful you'd come on the podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nate. It's really good to see you.
Well, you've had a really interesting career, and I wondered if you'd be willing to share maybe a lesson you've learned from at least three of these time periods. So, one in the military, Top Gun school, flying fighter jets, two attending Stanford Law School, and three working for Goldman Sachs slash Jordan Park. And if you'd be willing to share a lesson from each of these time periods, I'd love to hear something that you would most want to pass on to others.
Yeah, sure. So, I've been fortunate in my life to have had some uh, really kind of cool, formative experiences, and certainly taken away different things from each one, and grown quite a bit as a person from each one. And I would bucket them the same way that you did, Nate. I mean, certainly there was kind of growing up, but then, as an adult, there was an experience in the Navy that was wonderful and exciting for many, many reasons. And then, yeah, it was kind of a bridge between the Navy and normal adult life when we were in school at Stanford, and then, life in the professional world, both at Goldman and now at Jordan Park. And each one was very much unique and different from the other, and sort of different lessons learned along the way, hopefully all, generally positive and leading to kind of who I am today. And so at each one, there's sort of different things. And so with the Navy, the whole experience for me, came about for a variety of reasons. Both of my grandfathers had been pilots in the Second World War. And so when I was a kid, I wanted, well, I mean, like everybody, I wanted to play professional baseball, but once it was clear that that was not going to happen, I pivoted to wanting to be a Navy pilot. And the Navy piece of that happened because when I was 8 years old, a movie called Top Gun came out, and so
Heard
before
of that?
that, you've heard of it, yeah. Some people have heard of it, and so I knew I wanted to fly because of the experience that I'd had with my dad's dad in particular, and talking to him about flying during the war. And then, of course, Top Gun came out, and it was all Navy all the time after that. And I was fortunate to get into the Naval Academy, and then to have a career in flying. And all of these things kind of happened in parallel with, getting some really good advice, I think, from my dad when I was growing up, and in particular after I'd gone to the Naval Academy. And people always used to sort of ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And of course, I wanted to fly, and I think often people would sort of react, well, that's kind of, I mean, got it, but I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be play, and it's just kind of lumped in with those things that can be pretty hard to actually achieve. And the advice from both my parents, and again my dad in particular, was, do something that is, if you can when you're young, and you have the ability and the good fortune to do it, but do something when you're young that's really kind of cool and exciting, and you've got lots of time to grow up and get a day job, and be a real adult and all those sorts of things. But if you have the opportunity when you're in your early 20s, try to do something that's kind of neat, and maybe even what's more, try to do something where you're kind of in a place where no one cares who your parents were, or how much money they had or influence they had, and try to go to some place where you can really sort of prove yourself. And the only thing that really matters is what you do and what you contribute, rather than where you came from, or where where you didn't come from. And the military was really a perfect place for that kind of thing. I think there's probably lots of other places, Peace Corps, and you could also just throw a backpack on your shoulders and start walking, and see where the path takes you. But for me, the military was that place, and I definitely had a wonderful experience in that regard, which was, you sort of get there, and they strip away all all individuality from you. They kind of break that down, take that away, and nothing is more important than the team and the mission. And that can be kind of a good experience for forming really strong bonds with people. It also teaches you a lot about yourself and what you can accomplish, and to be self-reliant and all of those sorts of things. But I really think it was that initial advice of do something that's fun and exciting, and do something where, it's not what your parents did or what they contributed or the check that they wrote, it's what you did. And that was really formative for me. It gave, a lot of confidence. Not that my parents were writing big checks to anything, it was more just being in that environment to where, you really get to prove yourself on your own merits. And in so doing, you get to just form amazing relationships with wonderful people that are hopefully lifelong relationships. And then within flying, I mean, there's a million things that I could say. It's just such a cool experience to be able to fly Navy fighter aircraft. And at this point, I've actually been gone from it longer than I ever did it. And so in some ways these days, it almost feels like a dream at this point, that I remember that happened, but in the same way that I remember, things from dreams at this point. And the way that actually it's most tangible is occasionally my kids will be digging around in the garage, and they'll stumble onto some, sea bag or something like that had has a flight suit in it or something like that, and they'll be asking me what that is, and there's patches and things like that on these things, and describing what they were and what they were for, and so that's kind of the way it's still tangible for me these days, other than maybe going to an air show and seeing the Blue Angels and things like that.
So I'm going to try to give the same advice to my kids. Do something cool where you can forge your own path, where it's not about where you came from or where you didn't come from. And I was thinking about when I was in my mid-20s, I was still playing football, and a lot of my friends, they'd like moved on. It was like, yeah, football, that was something you do in high school, like get over it. And here I am 8 years post high school, and I was still playing, but like I loved it. And it was the last chance, I got the rest of my life to work. And so I encourage people to do the same. Just do something fun when you can. And then it's interesting too. You mentioned the Navy and it being like a dream. I remember years after I played football, I was down on the sideline doing reporting, and I'd see these big hits on the sideline, and I would think to myself, like, I would never do that.
I
would
could not do
never,
that.
I could not do that. I would never do that. I could not do that. I was like, oh yeah, I did used to do that. In
Yeah,
terms of being a fighter pilot, though, this is like a whole other level. I mean, the
yeah.
G forces you're experiencing, the adrenaline you must feel. Is there any way to even begin to describe that feeling of flying these planes? And can you remind me, what planes were you flying, and what G's are you experiencing?
Yeah.
How expensive are these? Like, what's that like?
Yeah, so I was a Navy F-18 C and E pilot. And so if you watch the new version of Top Gun, which came out in the last year or so,
I've heard of
it's
it, seen it. It was awesome.
it's probably the greatest movie that was ever made. And my kids all feel the same way, which is cool for me. But so the F-18E is the version of the plane that you see Tom Cruise flying around in, and which has got one seat, and then there's another version that has two seats called the F-18F. But I flew the C, which was the predecessor to those airplanes, and then the E model, which is again the one you see in the movie. And it's kind of like a flying. I mean, flying. So today I do some flying still in Cessna type airplanes, and it is definitely not the same thing. It's very different. Flying one of those fighter jets is kind of like being in a wrestling match while driving a sports car and playing video games at the same time. And as I know you're someone who likes video games, maybe you like that description, because you're there's a variety of things going on that are sometimes depicted in Hollywood films to some extent, and sometimes not, where again you're wrestling. So you're pulling G's as you say, and all pilots talk with their hands, so you'll see me start doing that now that I'm talking about flying. But you're when you're moving the aircraft in that way, you're pulling 6-7 G's on a routine basis. The aircraft is limited to 7.5 G's under normal operations, and 9 G's under extenuating circumstances. And so it's quite a bit of force on the body. If you can imagine your head weighing 7 times what it weighs right now, it puts a little stress on the neck every once in a while. And I say wrestling because I don't know if you've ever done any wrestling, but when you first start doing it, you just have this incredible feeling of every muscle in your body is tight, and you're just you're gassed almost immediately because you're like every muscle is firing in a way that you're just not used to initially. And then, like everything, you get conditioned to it and you actually get really good at it, and it's not that big of a deal like so many other things. But yeah, so wrestling match with a race car, because of course you're going 600 miles an hour while you're doing this, and all the while you're often running a radar system or some other types of sensors that are giving you a picture of the battlefield, in addition to a picture that you're hearing about in your ears, as you see in the movie Top Gun, when there's various people talking about what's happening in the battle space. And so I think all of those things together really just give you a pretty strong sense of self-reliance. And one thing that they don't really show that much in the second movie, there's some snippets of it, but in the first movie, there's the scene where at the very beginning, when you'll remember that one of the pilots is having some trouble, and so the Tom Cruise character what we call joins up on the other aircraft, and so basically just flies right next to the other aircraft in order to give a little bit of coaching and guidance. And the airplane's kind of swirling around and doing all that stuff, but it is that kind of landing on the boat when in the Navy we call a boat, a lot of people would call it aircraft carriers, ships, but the pilots tend to just call it the boat. And so landing on the boat is really where you get tested quite a bit, in large part because it's really difficult to do at first. And the other thing that people don't realize is it's actually on TV. So just about every what we call a space, but every room on the boat or on the aircraft carrier has a TV in it, and the camera that's filming everybody come down to land is typically always on. And so everybody, for the most part, on the ship is watching you come down to land, and then you get graded on it, and the grades are all posted in what's called the ready room, or what we call the ready room, but it's basically it's kind of like a big classroom, basically, where you hang out with the members of your squadron. And there's usually like 8 or 9 of these ready rooms on the ship, and it's not, they don't just put like A+ or A-. It's called a greenie board, because they put colors for the grade. So green is you did a good job, and then brown is you did a bad job. So it's really easy to see from far away who's doing well and who's not. And so you really, really want to do well, because everybody's pretty competitive. And so when you have a bad experience or don't do very well, you're really frustrated with yourself, because not only do you feel stupid because you didn't do well, but also because you have to face the embarrassment of everybody on the ship basically having watched it. And then for weeks on end, that grade will be posted on the board, and so you'll have to keep looking at it long after you did it. So the point being, though, that you're wrestling, you're driving a sports car, playing video games, trying to land on a very small dot in the middle of the ocean. And so I think it definitely teaches you to be confident in your abilities. And honestly, the other thing is, you will definitely fail in that scenario a lot at first, and then even as you get more experience, you'll still fail. And so even when you have to still look at that bad grade on the board for weeks at a time, you just have to put it out of your mind, because you've got to go do the next one. And if you psych yourself out, that's going to be much worse. So it teaches you to just past is past, and you got to go play the next game, and you got to think about the next one and focus on that, because if you focus on the past, you won't be ready for the next one, you
To
know.
say nothing of your own life is in the balance if you can't figure this out.
Totally. I mean, a lot of the
And
guys who are grading you are also there to save your life if you do something really dumb, and meaning like they're not flying the plane for you, but they are talking to you, just like you see in that first movie,
Mhm.
and they'll say pull up, or do something to avoid making a drastic mistake that you're about to make. So there's people that are trying to help you, but by and large you're doing it by yourself.
And the cost of the aircraft. I mean,
Oh yeah,
are you thinking
so
about that as well? Like, or do you just try to
no.
forget that?
Yeah. I mean, it's not even imaginable. I think they're, $60 or $70 million a copy, and the new ones. And by the way, the F-18s are the old planes now. They're not even the new one. They were cool in my day, but they're not cool. The F-35 is the new one. I think that one's even more expensive. So you're talking, tens of millions of dollars for these airplanes, and yeah, you just try not. It's not even a number you can comprehend when you're a young naval officer.
Well, I could listen to you speak about this for hours, but I want to hear what else you have to say. Maybe we could
Yeah,
schedule another time where,
sure.
and we're getting together out in California in a few weeks. Maybe we could
Yeah,
talk some more about this. I would just
yeah,
love to hear more about flying. Okay, so you graduate
yeah.
from school, you finish, you serve your time in the military, and now you're on to the next phase. So I'd love to hear about this next phase and what you learned there.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, Stanford for me was just a wonderful experience in so many ways. It was good because it was humbling, and coming out of, being a Navy single seat fighter pilot, Top Gun grad, I was probably in a good spot to have some humbling, because I probably, I'd been doing it for, about 10 years when I got out. And so, I was kind of at the peak of my game, I'd say physically and mentally, and it's good to go to a place to be reminded that, actually there are a lot smarter people out there than Navy fighter pilots, and it's nice to be among them in a school situation, and to be reminded of what real intelligence looks like, which was not me, but there was definitely some folks in our class in that category. And but interestingly about that, one of the things that I kind of, it really, I mean, in addition to that, which is all true, but when you're in the military for so long, and I'd gone to the Naval Academy, and then I've been on active duty for 10 years. So I was 14 years in that kind of an environment. One of the things you sort of forget is that not everybody in the world thinks like you.
Yeah.
But when in the military, military folks do tend to be, they've all gone through there's different services with different traditions and all these things, but by and large, everyone's gone through some kind of basic training experience, a crucible type experience. During our years, almost everybody went to either Iraq or Afghanistan, or both, or maybe multiple times, and so had combat experience. And when you're in that type of an environment, you're just so conditioned when you're presented with a problem that everyone is going to do their best to break this problem down to its constituent parts as quickly as possible, get to an answer as quickly as possible, and then execute as quickly as possible. And because everyone has been trained so similarly, they tend to react and do things in the same way. And so, but coming to a place like Stanford, all of a sudden I was, wow, folks think very differently about everything here, whether it's, of course, things like politics or what's going on in the world. Of course, I mean, law school is all about that, but also even just basic, like how someone attacks solving a problem was very quite different. And some people are extremely contemplative, so they'll take time to think about, here's the problem, and then they'll just kind of set the problem down for a couple days, and kind of be turning it around in their head and thinking about it, and the different angles and all this sort of thing. And a military person is like, problem, analysis, decision, execution, go. It's just very, very, you don't wait around. And I actually learned, and to really appreciate, gosh, let's not rush a decision that doesn't need to be rushed. Let's, if there's some problem that we're working on and we're not under a deadline, let's just kind of let that let's let it play out. We're going to learn more as time goes on, and you'll have people who have different perspectives that attack problems in different ways and hear what they have to say, and decide what you like, and what you think needs work, and you actually may get to a much better outcome than you would have if you just sort of sliced it, diced it, figured out what the plan was, and then went off and executed. So it really was, an experience of just being with incredibly brilliant people and seeing how they thought about the world, and how they thought about problem solving that was probably most formative on me. I mean, there's lots of things that I remember about being in class that, I don't really use that much anymore, but that's one where, I've actually recently, over time, conditioned myself to slow down decision making when it's possible to do so in order to try to get to better decisions.
Interesting. Yeah. Just because we've developed a certain way of doing it in the past
Yeah.
and it's worked for us,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that's the only way. And when it's staring
Yeah.
you in the face every day with all these
Yeah.
people from all over the world that are
Yeah.
thinking in way different ways. And one of my favorite memories was my con law class. Professor let us out like 10 minutes early, a couple days in a row. And the students were pissed. They were so upset. Like, we're paying so much, we want this education. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, that had never, the motto for me, is always like, you're trying to get out of class. But just even that
Same.
little
I remember
example is
having
like,
that same exact feeling,
yeah, these
like, oh, if they're
people
going to let
care.
us go, it means we don't have to ask any more questions. Let's get out of here.
Exactly. But yeah, they really cared. Like, they wanted to learn, and they
Yeah.
like, this was con law, like the most
At Stanford,
important class at
Yeah.
Stanford. And
Yeah.
how could you
Yeah.
shortchange us? So
Yeah.
yeah, very cool. Okay, so the next phase of your life. So you go to law school, and I
Yeah.
don't know if you ever took the bar.
I did. I
Okay,
so I did. I got a joint degree in law and a master's in management science and engineering with a concentration in finance while we were in school. And then I did take the bar exam. I don't,
which you're better than I did. I never took the bar. I graduated and said, peace, I'm
I,
out. I'm proud of you.
I have this. So my first 3 months at Goldman, I was in the Goldman Sachs training program and studying for the bar exam. And so it was funny because I was in New York for about 4 months for that. And I might as well just been on the dark side of the moon because it was basically Goldman until, from 7 to 5 or 7 to 6, whatever it was. And then, go back and study till midnight or whatever. And in retrospect, it was a total waste of time. I'm glad I did it. I passed it. I'm glad I passed and all this stuff, but I've literally never used it again since. So it was one of those, I can't remember which movie, but there was like this moment where I think it was maybe like Pulp Fiction or something like that, where the Bruce Willis character is talking about or maybe it was one of the other characters, but that's pride stinging you. I shouldn't have let pride sting me. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not getting the quote right, but if you let your pride sting you like that, you get yourself into situations that maybe actually turn out to be total waste of time, which that one was for me.
Well, thanks for making my day. So yeah,
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
continue.
yeah, totally. So honestly, that's like, there's very few things that I would say I wouldn't do it again. Honestly, it was a ton of work. I didn't get anything out of it. So it was, other than basically for the first couple of years after graduating, people would ask if I took it, and I could say yes, and I passed it, but that's not a good reason to do anything.
So what's that like now? You get to Goldman, you eventually go to Jordan Park. Like, what have you learned from this phase of your life that you'd most want to pass on?
Similar to the first point in some ways, but a riff on the first point, which is, if you're fortunate enough to do something that's really fun and exciting, as a 20 or 24, 25-year-old person, at some point you probably want to grow up and learn a little bit more about how the world works and have, quote unquote, real job. I mean, look, I've got lots of friends who stayed in the Navy for careers, many of whom are, going on 23, 24 years in the Navy now, and probably got another 10 to go before they get out, if not longer, if they continue to have success. And so it's not as if they never grew up. They certainly did, but it's definitely a challenging life. I can't believe how many deployments they've all done since I got out, and it's really hard on families and things like that. And it's amazing that we have we have people who are willing to do it. Because honestly, I was not, and we're fortunate as a nation that we do.
Can I just interrupt you real quick? I was talking
Yeah,
to a good friend of mine yesterday, and he's a recruiter, and they just told him he's going 6 days a week now recruiting.
yeah,
And like
it's
that's just
not.
it's hard for people. It's hard for civilians. It's hard for people to
You can't
appreciate.
even comprehend, you
Yeah,
know? Yeah, because you don't really have choice, right? You're in. So
exactly.
orders, as they say in the second Top Gun, orders are orders, Maverick, and
Yeah.
or they're called orders, Maverick, whatever they say. And so they're not asking. And so, at some point you may want to, at least, even if whatever that experience is, whether you're backpacking across Europe or Asia or in the Peace Corps or whatever it is, that at some point, there's probably some more stable occupation that you may seek out. At least I did. But one thing you want to try to do is if you've had the good fortune of doing something that is truly amazing, that you truly love, hopefully whatever that next chapter is, maybe there's nothing I'm ever going to love as much as flying all those jets with all my friends in the ways that we did. But, and it would be disingenuous to suggest as such, but, there's other things out there that are super interesting. And so when I was, starting to get more senior in the Navy, folks who had gotten out of the Navy a couple of years ahead of me had gone to work for this place called Goldman Sachs, which, I grew up in a real small town, and no one that I knew had ever worked there. I literally didn't even know what those words meant the first time I heard them. And they were said to me in a way that I was supposed to know what that was. Like, oh, Johnny got out and went to work for Goldman. And I was like, what is that? But they would call back to the squadron or whatever and say, hey, this is super interesting. If you think you're, considering getting out of the Navy, you might want to consider coming to work here. Very dynamic environment. Very fast paced, a lot of information, a lot of interesting information, a lot of really smart people. And so while we were in school, I started getting interested in financial services broadly, and just decided to go for it. So interviewed and had a great impression of the folks that I met at Goldman, and ended up joining full time. Was there for a number of years, and then was also fortunate to help start Jordan Park to be part of the firm where I'm a partner here today. And the thing that I am fortunate about is just kind of the basic job that we do is we give people investment and financial advice, which requires, lots of study and understanding about how money and markets all work. And those were things that I was, always somewhat tangentially interested in as a younger person, and then found as sort of a real adult after I got out of the Navy that I just really loved it. I mean, markets are ever changing, dynamic, and there's always a variety of opinions out there because we're making predictions about the future, which as Yogi Berra said is hard to do, and so. And so the result is that, you're just constantly being asked what your thoughts and views are on things. And you're doing as much research as you possibly can in order to have cogent responses to those questions. And I really like the subject matter. And I found that I did when we were in school, which is why I also added the master's degree to the law degree, because I was just enjoying the coursework so much. And so I'd say the advice is, even if you've got to go get sort of a grown-up adult job at some point in your life, try to make that something that you're really excited about. And there's, lots of different things to be excited about, whether it's working in financial services, being a teacher, any number of things. But I would solve for that thing that you're interested in first. And then, certainly, you're trying to earn money, which is why you're taking the job. So there's probably aspects of wanting to do a financial analysis to understand the ramifications of taking that job. But I wouldn't just take a job for the money, because I've seen lots of folks who have done that, and most of them end up being pretty miserable. And it's certainly trite and maybe cliche to say all those things, but for me, they've wound up being true. And so you want to enjoy what you do. You want to be challenged by it intellectually, and then you want to enjoy that challenge,
One of the frameworks that has always stuck with me when we're looking for a career is to try to hit on three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, where you have the flexibility and freedom to use your brain and solve problems, and the mastery, where you can learn something constantly, where there's always something new to learn.
Yeah.
And then purpose, where you're doing something beyond just yourself. And so I could imagine the multiverse version of me who, the current version of me went to that recruiting event with you and met some of those people that you ended up working with. And I was very excited about going into this, or about the potential of going into this career with you. And then I took a left turn and decided to go back to school and get a PhD. And my friend Justin Hansen, who is our mutual friend, still
Yeah.
tells me how stupid I am for not having gone to work with you every time he sees me. But I think it can be easy to think like, oh, financial services, it's this or that. But when I look at it through the lens of autonomy, mastery, purpose, it's like, wow, that's, it kind of nails it for me. So it's cool to hear that it's done that for you as well.
Yeah, and I love that framework. And I don't think I've heard you say that before, but it definitely captures all three for sure. And just, sometimes people might say, well, what's the purpose of it? And because it's not as if we're curing cancer by any means, we're definitely not. But, people really do value getting financial and investment advice. And I've had the good fortune of working with some of the smartest, most accomplished entrepreneurs of the last 20 years. And even those people who are, kind of truly masters of the universe, top of their profession, some of the wealthiest people in the country. And they really do value having perspective from people who've got a lot of experience and knowledge about specific areas. Because you realize, as time goes on and you get older, that you just can't have a mastery of every single discipline that's out there. And so, yeah, I really do think it solves all three, because the people that you work with really value the advice that you're giving and take it very seriously, which gives you purpose and encourages you to want to develop more mastery of it. And by becoming a master, you develop more autonomy to do it more often with more people.
And it's like, we know that relationships is where we derive our most meaning and happiness.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, we need to have money. And so to be able to help people take care
Yeah.
of the number one financial aspect that they care about most, or tangible,
Yeah.
physical asset, that's certainly provides a ton of value. Well, you've given me more of your time than I asked for.
Yeah.
I could go ask you so much more, but I appreciate you sharing this time with me. I just want to say one last thing. One of my favorite memories with you was, and I think I've probably shared this with you before, but we're taking that venture capital class. You and me were on the negotiation team together. And, I've known you as this very, respectful, mild-mannered, buttoned up military guy, very polite. And we decided to do the good cop, bad cop. Do you want to share what happened for that? Maybe I should I'll just share. What happened was I decided to be the good cop. And when you went to the bad cop, I thought, oh my gosh, this guy is straight from the military. The adrenaline that this guy can run on and the things he can do. We walked out of that negotiation. We dominated that negotiation more than anything else because of your ability to flip the switch. Anyway, I was just so impressed with you, all of your abilities, all of your interests, and all of these interesting sides to you. And just want to tell you, thanks again for coming on. So I'll give you the last word.
Oh, thank you so much. And maybe to your last point, when you're on a team, you've always got to know what your role is. So sometimes you're the kicker and sometimes you're the water carrier and sometimes you're the bad cop. And if that's your job, you got to just go do that as best you can, So everybody wants to be the good cop, but somebody's got to be the bad cop too sometimes. So.
You nailed it. Well, thanks again, Luke. And we'll be seeing you here soon.
All right. Thanks, Nate. Talk to you soon.